Today I'm doing something a bit controversial. I'm trying to stop you from ditching your higher tier 30 series card, such as an RTX 3080, in favor of a 5070 Ti or even worse, a 5080. Let's find out how good the RTX 3080 still is in 2025 across over 15 recent AAA games. Welcome back to BLG. I'm your host Ben London, and on this channel we focus on real-world gaming experiences with honest results. Like many of you, I've been watching tech channels on YouTube for many years, and every now and then I get hit with that classic FOMO, the fear of missing out. Should I upgrade my GPU? Or even my CPU? I've already skipped the entire 40 series generation. Surely now I deserve a shiny new 5070 Ti, right? You know that feeling. But here's the good news. I'm here to cure your GPU upgrade anxiety. If you've been playing AAA single-player games on a 3080 or higher 30 series card like a 3090 and are wondering now whether the 50 series is really worth the jump, you've come to the right place. I've tested and benchmarked over 15 recent AAA single-player games at 1440p ultrawide resolution to give you a real answer. I want to briefly address one elephant that can come up in the comment section up front. Yes, I'm still gaming on the AM4 platform on the Ryzen 9 5900X CPU. Should I not have upgraded to at least a 7800X3D or even a 9800X3D by now? The answer is no. In my types of games at 1440p ultrawide, which is already on the higher end of the resolution spectrum, we are almost always GPU limited. So yeah, since I don't play competitive esports games at 1080p resolution with ultra high refresh rates, I personally don't need a new CPU upgrade just yet. Plus, I use my PC for office work and, as you can see, for video production, so why would I swap a 12-core CPU for an 8-core chip with a 3D cache that's only beneficial for gaming? At the very least, I'd look at the Ryzen 9 9900X3D, that's already over 500 euros, then add a new motherboard to that, plus the DDR5 RAM, and whoops, I've ended up spending over 1000 euro on hardware. So there you have it. I just cured my own FOMO. It's as easy as that. Now, without much further ado, let's jump right into our first game, Stellar Blade. So, let's play a little game. And whilst I explain the rules to you, please enjoy this disappointingly last-gen Unreal Engine 4 footage from Stellar Blade, which nevertheless runs remarkably well on the 3080. But anyway, the rules are... Now I lost my train of thought. Right, there it goes. The rules are, if I can achieve 60 FPS with DLSS 4 transform model balanced or DLSS 3 CNN model quality on the 3080 with ultra settings or thereabouts, the same settings that I would use on the 50 series if they need to be optimized a little bit, then I will count it as a point for the 3080. And if it falls significantly below that, then I will count this as a win for the 50 series, as in such cases the 5070 Ti will give you a worthwhile improvement of your gaming experience. Now onto the performance test. I wanted to use the initial starting area IDOS 7, but right off the bat this is like the worst example, or maybe the best case scenario for the 3080, because performance between the 3080 and I have the 5080 here on the other side is almost identical using DLSS balanced. The gap widens ever so slightly if we switch that from DLSS balanced to quality, and then even more significantly from quality to DLAA. When we enter the first hub world Xion, the performance drops from the 117-ish FPS down to an average FPS in the mid-80s. And again, there isn't a huge difference between DLSS balanced and quality. Now, coming into the Wasteland open world area, performance goes up slightly, but by now we can say this is a clear win for the 3080 because we are well above the 60 FPS with either DLSS balanced or quality. Here's another game with extravagant costumes, but I'd say a lot more tasteful thanks to the newer Unreal Engine 5. Clair Obscur Expedition 33. It's Game of the Year material, but unfortunately hasn't moved up my gaming backlog, and so I haven't really played this one, and I'm one of the starting areas with a huge amount of stuff going on, lots of NPCs, so perhaps DLSS will scale not very well once more. Let's start off optimistic with DLAA. The 3080 cannot reach 60 FPS, but it gets a lot better once we switch to DLSS quality. And even DLSS balanced, which is our target, is well above the 60 FPS, so once again, another win for the 3080. The next Unreal Engine 5 game is a lot less optimized than the previous, and I don't want to misuse the term optimized, so let's just say it runs a bit shit on any hardware. And again, the performance differences between the 3080 and the 5070 Ti are very minor. Once again, I haven't played the Oblivion Remaster properly yet. I've just come out of the initial dungeon and I'm running up this path towards the Imperial City. With DLSS balanced and maxed out settings, both GPUs cannot even cross an average FPS of 50. And also the average PC latency on the 3080 is a bit too high for keyboard and mouse players at least. Let me turn off hardware lumen in the settings, and this gives us around 15 FPS extra and pushes the 5070 Ti finally over 60 FPS. I've retested it on the 3080 with the latest patch 1.2 and the performance increase is around 3 to 5% only. I could give this point to the 3080, but I'm not confident enough because I don't know about the rest of the game. So personally I would play this on the 5070 Ti with maxed out settings including hardware lumen and turning on frame generation and playing it on a controller for an overall smoother gameplay experience. Moving on with my ever-growing gaming backlog, but this one I played already on PS4 a long time ago. The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered on PC is not the worst of the Sony ports. Starting off with DLSS quality, the 3080 cannot quite cross that 60 FPS threshold, but it does so with DLSS balanced and maxed out settings. So even though the 5070 Ti performs significantly better here, as per my rules, the point goes to the 3080. We always need more horse riding in games. Up next is Assassin's Creed Shadows, and that's actually no longer on my backlog. Don't know what was I thinking, but I completed pretty much all of the content in that game. This is our first game with ray tracing, but not path tracing, so that'll be interesting how well the 3080 can keep up here. We start off with the built-in benchmark tool. We'll straight away go with DLSS balanced, but we max out every single graphics setting, including ray tracing. Sadly, the 3080 cannot even reach 50 FPS, whereas the 5070 Ti already crossed 60 FPS without even turning on frame generation. If we turned that on the 5070 Ti, as I would of course, then we would be over 100 FPS. The best I can do is optimize many of the graphics settings without sacrificing much of the visual fidelity on the 3080. As you can see here, FPS climbs to the mid-50s, but it's still not enough, and I don't want to turn off ray tracing entirely. In case you're wondering where those FPS figures come from, I measure my average FPS with CapFrameX, recording 1-minute runs of pretty much identical gameplay. So here's an in-game scene of admittedly not quite identical looking footage where I just run around in circles. But on the 3080 I already lowered so many settings trying to optimize this game to just barely reach 60 FPS, so you've already guessed it, the 5070 Ti is the clear winner. And this is how samurais confessed their mutual love in feudal Japan apparently. Let's move on to another medieval horse riding game, and that's Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, one of my favorites this year. This runs on CryEngine 4, made in Germany. So, can the 3080 run Crysis? For my benchmark runs, I chose a dense forest area near the alchemist's hut. At the absolute highest experimental setting, the 3080 averages around 50 FPS and the 5070 Ti performs almost 60% better already. If we go from DLSS quality to balanced, performance unfortunately only improves slightly. It's still not enough to reach 60 FPS on the 3080. So that means we have to drop from the experimental setting down to Ultra. So on the 50 series I would have no reason to forfeit that experimental setting. But we're all about real world and honest experience here, and honestly, the differences are so subtle you'd really have to look with a magnifying glass. And it's nowhere near extreme as something like turning off ray tracing, which this game doesn't even have by the way. So I'm gonna say that the baseline here is not the experimental setting, but Ultra. And therefore I'll award the next point to the 3080, because you're going to have an absolutely beautiful experience on that card. And feel free to roast me in the comment section for that decision. Up next is one of the worst Sony ports, which is a bit of a shame and rather odd as it's been done by the same company as the excellent Last of Us Part 2 Remaster port earlier. Sadly, I haven't been able to progress in Marvel's Spider-Man 2 much at all, so here we're just in the first free roam segment following the intro. Sand seems demanding enough, so hopefully that'll do. Even with DLSS 4 balanced, the 3080 cannot handle these maxed out ray tracing settings at all. The 5070 Ti, however, reaches 60 FPS comfortably, and it performs 144% better. That's crazy. So on the 3080 I dropped down ray tracing settings to high, but even then it doesn't reach 40 FPS. Only when we turn it off entirely do we finally get a nice 68 FPS in this scene. But that's not what we want. And on the 5070 Ti, if I turn on frame generation, we are at nearly 120 FPS. And it's worth noting that at least on the 50 series, and after many updates, this game runs significantly better than the Oblivion Remaster earlier. You may have noticed that the order in which I present the games here is by release date from latest to oldest, but I just realized I completely forgot about Doom the Dark Ages because I already devoted an entire video to this. In this video I used a very graphically intense area from Chapter 6 Siege Part 1. The RTX 3080 reached an average FPS of 74.3 with DLSS balanced and the maxed out Ultra Nightmare settings. The 5070 Ti got to 97.2 average FPS here, an improvement of 30.8%. Now, you will say, bah, this game recently had a path tracing update in July, and yes, I'm still due to make a new video on that. It is clear that this is not such a massive game changer as path tracing is in other games such as Cyberpunk 2077, Alan Wake 2 or Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. This is such a fast-paced game that I think it's probably a bit of a stretch to argue that this is adding so much more value in visual fidelity when only you're ever able to see the differences and side-by-side comparisons standing still. So, long story short, the point goes to the 3080. Going back in time, we've now crossed into 2024, and there I've got a game that I've already covered at length in previous videos, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Straight away I'm going to jump into the graphically most demanding area, not just in this game, but in any sequence that I featured in this video, Sukhothai. And that initial jungle intro from Raiders of the Lost Ark has nothing on it. Since this is an extraordinarily VRAM hungry game, and my 3080 only has 10 GB, I had to lower the texture pool size setting from Supreme down to High. And it appears to narrowly reach that 60 FPS target, but unfortunately it wasn't running very stable, had quite a few crashes, so I had to lower the texture pool size setting even more to the lowest setting. Average FPS is now in the mid-80s, which is amazing, but we've already made so many sacrifices, and somehow the game's already decided for me that on my 3080 I'm not allowed to even see the path tracing options in the menu. Now, don't get me wrong, the game looks already stunning with the regular ray tracing that is forced as in Doom the Dark Ages, and I played the majority of the game on the 3080. But once I was able to try out path tracing on the 5070 Ti, it really felt like a transformational experience. It can still be quite a headache when you want to turn on frame generation mid-game and suddenly the game cops out on you because you've reached the 16 GB of VRAM limit. But I was able to complete the Sukhothai level on the 5070 Ti with maxed out path tracing and some form of frame generation, as long as we are happy to accept an average PC latency between 60 to 70 milliseconds. Despite all these VRAM management struggles, to me the 5070 Ti is the clear winner. Up next is S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2, Heart of Chornobyl, a game that's been updated over and over for the past year and it still doesn't run very well. I've picked this area which is called garbage, and in terms of performance it literally is. I'm running from this viewing platform down all the way to this hub area, and it took me ages because I fell down and died so many times. With DLSS quality and maxed out epic settings, neither of the cards can reach 60 FPS. And even with DLSS balanced, it isn't quite enough. The 5070 Ti performs exactly the same, so further optimization would be in order. The performance gap between those two cards is so minuscule that you might as well play this game on the 3080 and lower your settings to perhaps high or medium. Just to make sure I'm not going crazy, I've retested the sequence again on the 5080 just now, and with the latest patch 1.5.2. Again, I don't even gain 10% by dropping from Epic down to High, that the performance gap between Epic on the 3080 at the bottom and High on the 5080 at the top is only 15.6%. What the fuck? Back then I abandoned S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 in favor of a full playthrough of Silent Hill 2 Remake on the 3080. It ran really well on near maxed settings. Ray tracing I probably turned on only in interior scenes. And for my test sequence I've chosen the start of the game where you run down a forest area, which is a bit unfair because the rest of the game doesn't have quite that much foliage. We're using DLSS quality here because natively it still runs on DLSS 3 CNN model. The 3080 cannot achieve 60 FPS in this scene with either ray tracing turned on or off. We don't gain all that much by turning it off, but here's something very abnormal. I don't know if it's because NVIDIA Reflex isn't implemented properly, but we have to turn on NVIDIA frame generation in order to lower our average PC latency from 70 milliseconds down to 55.7 milliseconds. And this isn't the only Unreal Engine 5 game where I observed this. Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 has probably been the most updated game in the last 12 months. We are already on major release version 9. If anything, this shows that the developers really care, and they've even added ray-traced ambient occlusion recently. But that's not something I factored into my test here. This is a particularly CPU heavy game, but with the 3080 reaching an average FPS of 88 in this scene, that's beside the point, wouldn't you agree? This monkey, or should I say these monkeys, have been regular guests on my show. But I've never tested Black Myth Wukong on the 3080. Well, I'm sorry to say, but the 3080 cannot handle this game with any form of ray tracing turned on, and we have to turn it off entirely. And this is not only because of poor average FPS, but because of very bad average PC latency. Because again, this is another Unreal Engine 5 game where we have to turn on NVIDIA frame generation in order to lower our average PC latency and thereby making this game a lot more playable, especially in the more tougher boss fights. So let's not waste any more time here by attempting further optimization for the 3080 and just move on to the next game. I'm losing the plot over Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. Maybe not quite like the protagonist in this game, but it's because they've released an enhanced version of this game this week that introduces a very high graphics setting, which is something that I cannot factor into today's test. But since I completed the game on the 3080 with DLSS quality and the high setting, then logically so could you.
Can I really? Does it really?
3080 isn't good enough anymore. I need a new GPU.
No, you don't.
I did briefly benchmark this on the 5080 earlier, and the performance cost of very high versus high is around 9%, so it's not nothing. A deeper analysis would be beyond the scope of this video, but let's assume that the bump in post-processing quality, shadow quality, volumetrics, and view distance won't be too noticeable during regular gameplay. We're breezing through these games at breakneck speed, and now going back as far as 2023, we're coming to the point where I should be talking about Alan Wake 2 and Cyberpunk 2077, the Phantom Liberty DLC. And I'm a bit of two minds about this. This video poses the question if you as a 3080 or similar owner should be buying a 5070 Ti or something like that. But if you've been owning the 3080, then the chances are very high that you've already been playing these older games, right? I'm pretty sure I had some form of ray tracing turned on, but was I really playing this at 40 FPS back then? Or outside of these demanding forest areas, a bit over 50 FPS? Even the 5070 Ti only reaches an average FPS of 45 at DLSS balanced and maxed out path tracing. So in my opinion, the way to play this game in 2025 is with frame generation turned on, and then you average around 80 FPS, but with a fairly high average PC latency of over 70 milliseconds, which however is not an issue if you're playing on a controller at least. So somewhat reluctantly, I will give this point to the 5070 Ti, but given the extensive backlog of more recent games, I would never prioritize another full playthrough of Alan Wake 2, and to me this is now nothing more than a path tracing showcase. And the same thing can be said about the next game on the list. I built this machine around the 3080 just for the release of Cyberpunk 2077 in December 2020, and I completed this game with fairly high ray tracing settings in 4K with that 3080. And on the left side is a representation of this, whereas on the right side is how you would probably play it today on a 3080. No path tracing, but maxed out regular ray tracing, and with DLSS 4 transform model set to balanced, you can actually achieve an average frame rate of well over 60 FPS now, in the base game. But coming into the additional Dogtown area from the Phantom Liberty DLC, things look a whole lot different. Obviously path tracing is a non-option on the 3080, averaging out at only 20 FPS here, and even the 5070 Ti is really struggling here. But even with path tracing turned off and just having regular ray tracing enabled, it is not enough to bring the 3080 over this average 60 FPS. So same as with Alan Wake 2, the best way to play this in 2025 is on the 5070 Ti with maxed out path tracing and frame generation turned on. And Cyberpunk is also a really good case study for multi-frame generation, as the average PC latency doesn't increase all that much. So I hope you don't mind that I've treated Cyberpunk 2077 and the Phantom Liberty DLC as two separate games, and I've awarded a point to each card, so it's essentially a draw. And before I wrap up, just really quick here another game that I didn't include today as it's not really backlog worthy. The 3080 cannot handle Mind's Eye at all at maxed out settings. And have you ever seen such a horrendous frame time graph? So in summary, here's the list of games where I decided that the 3080 is still good enough in 2025 and you don't need to upgrade your GPU for those. And I could have added many more, such as Game of the Year award winners Baldur's Gate 3 or Balatro. And here the list of games where I assessed that the 5070 Ti will give you a significantly improved experience over the 3080. So now for the final score, drum roll please. Oh no, the 3080 won. Don't go out and buy a new GPU. But who am I kidding? If you've been itching to try out Nvidia's frame generation and don't mind keeping it enabled by default, then yes, the 5070 Ti at something close to MSRP could be a worthwhile upgrade right now. But if you're happy just using DLSS 4 balanced, aiming for 60 FPS at 1440p or ultrawide, and dialing back a few of those ultra settings, basically giving up on path tracing entirely, then yes, the 3080 is still good enough for many of those games in 2025. Hopefully that's taken off the edge of your FOMO at least for a while. Should you wait for the 50 series super refresh for next year with the 24GB of VRAM models? I can't predict the future, but judging by my own personal launch experience this year in January and February, I would expect the stock levels and prices to reach acceptable levels only around this time next year. And then performance for the 5070 Ti Super, as well as the 5080 Super, will almost certainly be pretty much the same as their current versions, just with that extra overclocking headroom baked in as higher factory clocks. I've already talked about this extensively in my previous videos, that at least my 50 series GPUs that I've tested had already around 10% overclocking headroom, and I suspect that Nvidia is just gonna upsell you this untapped potential in their next lineup of GPUs. And what about that 16GB versus the 24GB of VRAM? Yes, I agree that the RTX 5080 with just 16GB of VRAM was not a good value this year. But can anyone name me 5 real-world examples where 16GB of VRAM currently is not enough? In my previous video, I showed one real example, the Sukhothai level in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, with maxed out path tracing at 4K resolution, frame generation turned on, and then the texture pool size setting set to supreme. There, the 16GB of VRAM was not enough. But there have been scientific papers about a new texture compression technology by Nvidia. And this promises to reduce VRAM usage by over 90%. But that's something that's a bit more on the horizon right now. We don't quite know when that will be available. And then I think it's also something that has to be implemented on a game-by-game basis by the developers. It's something that gives all those 16GB card owners, such as myself, a bit of hope that those cards will last us for a little while longer. So there you have it. We've reached the end of the video. Tell me about your own FOMO in the comments. I cannot wait to hear about your own GPU upgrade anxieties. Like and subscribe if you want to see more of this type of stuff, and I see you in the next video.